Spring sunlight filtered softly through the canopy of old oak trees, lining the streets of Savannah, Georgia, casting dappled shadows across the cobblestones. In a quiet historic district near Forsyth Park stood a stately white brick townhouse with black shutters and ivy climbing its facade. Inside, Victoria Hale was standing by the kitchen window, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand and a faint, satisfied smile playing on her lips. At 36, she was the founder and CEO of the largest commercial cleaning company in Savannah, a business she had built from scratch, with nothing but determination and long nights spent chasing contracts no one else believed she could win. Just last week, she had signed the biggest deal of her career, a multi-year partnership with a chain of luxury hotels that would double the company's revenue and cement its dominance in the region. The press had called it a Cinderella story in corporate form, and for once, Victoria felt that maybe they were right. Behind her, Jonathan Hale shuffled into the kitchen, still in his robe, hair tousled from sleep. He was a literature professor at Savannah State University, the kind of man who quoted Whitman over breakfast and could spend hours lost in 19th century novels. When Victoria launched her company 12 years earlier, Jonathan had been her anchor, the one who believed when no one else did, who cooked dinner when she worked until midnight, who managed the home so she could chase her ambition without guilt. They had been married for 12 years now, and by all appearances theirs was a perfect marriage. No screaming matches, no betrayals, no scandals. Friends often envied how stable they seemed, how effortlessly they moved through life as a team. But beneath that polished surface, something quieter had settled, a stillness that wasn't peace but distance. They hadn't fought, but they also hadn't laughed together in years. They hadn't shared secrets, hadn't planned for the future beyond the next quarterly report or faculty event. It was as if their marriage had become a well-maintained house, intact, functional, and utterly devoid of warmth. Victoria's mind drifted back, uninvited, to a different spring 16 years earlier. Fresh out of college, she had found herself unexpectedly pregnant. Terrified, yet secretly thrilled, she and Jonathan had begun to dream of a future with a child. But those dreams shattered one rainy night on I-16 when a speeding truck sent their car spinning into a ditch. Victoria woke up in a hospital bed battered and broken and empty. The doctors told her the baby hadn't survived. Then they told her something worse. The internal damage meant she would likely never conceive again. That loss had gutted her. And so, in the hollow that remained, she poured everything into building a company that could not be taken from her, something that would grow even if her body could not. Jonathan had been patient then, tender even. But over the years, the subject of children vanished from their conversations, buried under layers of routine and resignation. Until one evening in early spring, seated across from each other at a riverside restaurant on the Savannah River, Victoria found the courage to bring it up again. Candlelight flickered between them, catching the silver strands now threading through Jonathan's hair. "Do you ever think about children?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the hum of conversation around them. Jonathan didn't look up from his wine glass. "You never wanted them," he said simply, swirling the deep red liquid as if discussing the weather. "I didn't think I could," she replied, trying to keep her tone steady. "That's not the same thing." He sighed, finally meeting her gaze. "I don't want to raise a child on my own, Victoria. I don't want a nanny doing it either. And I'm too old to start over with diapers and sleepless nights." The words landed with the cold precision of a scalpel. Victoria stared at him, searching for the man who had once wept with her in a hospital room. He wasn't cruel, not exactly, but there was no trace of tenderness either. Only detachment, like this was a topic long settled in his mind. The rest of the meal passed in polite conversation, but something in Victoria had shifted. That night, as they drove home beneath the hanging moss and street lamps of their neighborhood, the silence between them felt heavier than it ever had before. For the first time in 12 years, she felt the chill of something she couldn't quite name, a distance that had been growing in the shadows all along, and now, suddenly, she could see it clearly. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Hale townhouse, gilding the breakfast table in warm light. Victoria was already dressed for a meeting, her phone buzzing with emails and calendar alerts. Jonathan, in a crisp shirt and blazer, kissed her cheek before she left and mentioned casually that he needed to stop by the university. Some lecture notes, he said, that he had forgotten to upload. She nodded absently, her mind on quarterly reports and a board meeting. The front door closed behind him with the quiet confidence of routine. But Jonathan didn't drive toward Savannah State University. Instead, he turned east, weaving through the heart of the city until the historic district gave way to glass and steel towers and luxury high-rises. He parked beneath a sleek residential building in Midtown Savannah, one of those places where the concierge greets you by name and the elevators whisper upward without a sound. Apartment 17B was nothing like the Victorian townhouse he shared with Victoria. It was modern, decadent, floor-to-ceiling windows, pale marble floors, a minimalist kitchen stocked with imported wine. And sprawled across the velvet couch, scrolling lazily through her phone, was Madison Clark. At 19, Madison was everything Victoria wasn't, at least in Jonathan's eyes. She was soft-spoken and wide-eyed, with a kind of effortless youth that clung to her like perfume. Originally from Jacksonville, she had come to Savannah for college, posting study abroad photos and day in my life videos that masked a far more calculated ambition. She had learned quickly how to charm older men with money, and Jonathan had been easy prey. He had met her after a guest lecture. She had lingered after class, shy and attentive, asking thoughtful questions about poetry and prose. One coffee turned into weekly dinners. Dinners became weekends together. Within 6 months, Madison was living in the apartment Jonathan rented for her. And within a year, she had him wrapped so tightly around her finger, he barely recognized himself. Jonathan paid for everything. Her rent, her designer clothes, a silver SUV parked downstairs. He had even whisked her away to Miami for spring break, under the pretense of attending an academic conference. Madison had mastered the art of pretending innocence while tightening her grip. And recently, she had added a new card to her deck. She told Jonathan she might be pregnant. She had whispered it into his ear one night as they lay tangled on that same couch. "I don't know yet," she murmured, eyes wide and trembling. "But if I am, I can't raise a child in a place like this. I need something more stable. A real loma." When Jonathan hesitated, Madison's sweetness sharpened. She said she couldn't keep living like a secret, hidden in an apartment she didn't own, unsure if he was serious. If he didn't improve her living conditions, she threatened she would leave and take his child with her. Terrified of losing her, Jonathan acted. He purchased the apartment through a friend's company so Victoria wouldn't see the transaction in public records. He upgraded Madison's lifestyle, showering her with gifts, all while telling himself it was love. One evening, over wine and expensive takeout, Madison pressed further. "If you really want a future with me," she said softly, tracing circles on his hand, "you need to think about how to secure one. Doesn't your wife own most of the company? Wouldn't it be fair for you to have part of it after everything you've done for her?" Jonathan's face hardened. "I can't. The prenup makes that impossible. Everything stays in her name." Madison's gaze flickered, not disappointment but calculation. "Well," she said slowly, "that's only true if she's alive." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jonathan laughed nervously, brushing it off as a joke, but Madison didn't smile. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. "If something ever happened to her," she whispered, "you'd inherit everything. The company, the house, the money, all of it would be yours and ours." Something shifted inside Jonathan in that moment, a seed planted in the dark. He didn't speak, didn't nod, but the idea burrowed deep and refused to leave. On the drive home, Savannah's oak-lined streets blurred past his windshield. Madison's words replayed over and over until they no longer sounded absurd. They began to sound like possibility, like freedom. And by the time he parked in front of the townhouse he shared with Victoria, a new thought had taken root, small, poisonous, and unstoppable. He would never have everything he wanted as long as she was alive. And for the first time, Jonathan began to imagine a future without her in it. A few weeks passed, and spring deepened over Savannah. At Hale and Company headquarters, a glass-walled building tucked just off Broughton Street, Victoria moved through back-to-back meetings with practiced efficiency. The company was expanding faster than ever, and the weight of leadership pressed heavier on her shoulders each day. Svetlana, her longtime assistant and closest confidant, often reminded her to rest, to slow down. But Victoria brushed it off with the same smile and promise she always gave. After this quarter. It was Jonathan who seized on that detail first. One afternoon, while dropping by the office with lunch, a gesture he hadn't made in months, he struck up a conversation with Svetlana in the break room. "She's been under so much pressure," he said, his tone all concern and tenderness. "I'm worried about her. I think what she really needs is to step away, just for a week, somewhere remote, somewhere she can breathe." Svetlana agreed that Victoria was exhausted. Jonathan leaned in, lowering his voice. "I was thinking about a trip to the Appalachian Mountains. There's a resort up there, secluded cabins, hiking trails, lakes. It's peaceful. It might be exactly what she needs." The idea seemed thoughtful, even sweet, and Svetlana promised to look into options. Within days, she had brochures and itineraries ready, and Jonathan eagerly volunteered to finalize the details. A week later, she stopped by the travel agency to drop off some documents, and that's when she saw him. Jonathan, standing by the front desk, wasn't alone. A young woman, barely out of her teens, with glossy chestnut hair and designer sunglasses perched on her head, was laughing softly beside him. They were standing too close, their familiarity unmistakable. Svetlana hesitated in the doorway, debating whether to approach them, but before she could decide, they walked out together, his hand grazing the small of the girl's back as they stepped into the sunlight. It gnawed at her for days. She tried to rationalize it, maybe a student, maybe a family friend, but the image wouldn't leave her mind. Then, one afternoon, as she walked past Victoria's office door, she heard a muffled voice. It was Madison, speaking to someone on the phone, just outside in the hallway. Svetlana paused. "No, of course, I'm not pregnant," Madison said, her tone dripping with amusement. "He's too easy to manipulate. Say the word, baby, and he'll do anything. A house, a car, whatever I want. He actually thinks I'd settle down with him." Svetlana froze. The words were like ice water. The student wasn't just involved with Jonathan. She was using him. And the pregnancy he had spoken of wasn't real. Her first instinct was to storm into Victoria's office and tell her everything. But then doubt crept in. Maybe it wasn't her place. Maybe Victoria already knew. Maybe it was something the two of them would resolve privately, the way couples always did. In the end, she said nothing, and tried to convince herself that silence was the kindest choice. Victoria, meanwhile, was fraying at the seams. The company was thriving, but the home she returned to each night felt colder than ever. Jonathan had grown distant, detached. He spoke to her with polite interest, but the warmth was gone. One night, as they sat in their living room beneath the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the dam inside her broke. "Do you even see me anymore?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling. "Or am I just someone you share a house with?" Jonathan looked up from his book, blinking as though the question had come from nowhere. "You're tired," he said gently. "That's all this is." "No," she said, standing now, anger and grief tangling in her chest. "This is more than tired. This is years of you pulling away and pretending it's nothing. I don't even know what we are anymore." He set the book aside, rose, and walked to the drawer by the console table. When he returned, he held 2 envelopes in his hands. "I thought you might feel this way," he said softly, pressing them into hers. "I've already booked something for us. a cabin in the Appalachians, a week away from everything. Svetlana helped me arrange it. Victoria stared at the plane tickets tucked inside. The gesture was so unexpected, so unlike the man he had become, that tears pricked her eyes. Maybe, she whispered, this is what we need. Jonathan smiled, the same warm, reassuring smile that had once made her believe they could survive anything. And for the first time in a long time, Victoria let herself hope. 3 days later, the Hales car wound its way through the serpentine roads of the Appalachian foothills, climbing higher and higher until the air grew thin and cool. The resort Jonathan had chosen sat nestled among towering pines and wild rhododendrons, a cluster of luxury cabins perched above a glassy mountain lake. The staff greeted them by name, luggage whisked away, complimentary champagne offered on silver trays. It was the kind of place meant for healing, or at least for pretending. Victoria tried to let herself believe in the promise of the place. She breathed deeply, hoping the mountain air could clear the heaviness in her chest. But Jonathan, from the moment they arrived, seemed more distracted than ever. He had mapped out a schedule so tightly packed it barely left them room to breathe. Guided hikes at dawn, kayaking at noon, wine tastings in the evening. And yet, for all the shared activities, he avoided being truly present with her. At dinner, he spent more time on his phone than speaking to her. On hikes, he walked several paces ahead, leaving her to catch up. In the evenings, he feigned exhaustion and turned in early. It was as if he was determined to fill their time with everything except intimacy. On the fourth afternoon, a soft rain drifted through the forest as they returned from a group excursion. Jonathan retreated to the cabin's study under the pretense of catching up on university work. Victoria stood by the window, watching mist curl over the ridges beyond. The silence pressed in. She slipped on her raincoat and stepped outside. "I'm going for a walk," she called over her shoulder. Jonathan didn't look up from his laptop. "Don't go far," he murmured. The forest was hushed and damp, the scent of pine thick in the cool air. Victoria followed a narrow trail that wound deeper into the woods, trying to untangle the knot of emotions inside her. She thought of the woman she used to be, hopeful, deeply in love, and wondered when, exactly, they had lost each other. She wanted to believe there was something left to salvage, but doubt gnawed at her. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the fork in the path until she had already chosen wrong. The trail narrowed, then vanished altogether, swallowed by undergrowth. Rain began to fall harder, the ground slick beneath her boots. She turned back, or thought she did, but the forest seemed unfamiliar now, endless and disorienting. That was when her foot sank. At first, she thought it was just soft soil, but as she shifted her weight, the ground gave way beneath her. She gasped and tried to pull free, but the mud clung to her boots like glue. Within seconds, she was sinking to her knees. Panic surged. She grabbed at roots, branches, anything she could reach, but they snapped in her hands. The more she struggled, the deeper she sank. "Help!" she screamed, her voice tearing through the rain. "Somebody, please!" The forest swallowed the sound. She tried again, louder, desperation rising with the mud, now creeping toward her waist. Her heart pounded. "Jonathan!" she shouted. "Jonathan, help me!" And then a shape through the trees. "Jonathan!" she sobbed, relief flooding her chest as he stepped into the clearing. He stood just beyond the edge of the bog, hands in his jacket pockets, watching her. "Please," she gasped. "I'm stuck. I can't get out. Please help me." He didn't move. Instead, he crouched at the edge of the mire, his expression strangely serene. "Do you know," he said quietly, "how long I've waited for this?" Victoria froze. "What are you talking about?" "I'm tired, Victoria," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I'm tired of living in your shadow. I'm tired of being the husband of Savannah's Queen of Sanitation while you build an empire, and I disappear." He shook his head slowly. "I want a life of my own. With Madison. She's carrying my child, and she deserves better than this." Her stomach lurched. "Please," she whispered. We can fix this. I'll give you everything. The house, the company, just let me live. Jonathan smiled faintly. But if you die, he said, I don't need you to give me anything. It all becomes mine. Jonathan! He straightened, brushing imaginary dirt from his hands. I'll come back later, he said. I'll say you wandered off, that I searched everywhere. And then, as if nothing in the world were wrong, he began to whistle a soft, cheerful tune and walked away, his figure disappearing into the rain. Jonathan! She screamed, her voice raw. Please! But the forest answered only with silence, and the cold, what earth kept pulling her down. The rain had grown heavier by the time Jonathan's footsteps faded into the forest, and the sky above the canopy had turned a bruised shade of gray. Victoria's breath came in ragged bursts, each one shallower than the last. The cold mud crept past her waist, tugging at her legs with relentless strength. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to thrash and claw her way free, but the harder she struggled, the faster she sank. Think, she whispered to herself, tears stinging her eyes. Think. Her mind flashed back to a hospital room 16 years earlier, the smell of antiseptic, the hum of machines. She remembered waking up to Jonathan's hand wrapped around hers, remembered the doctor's voice telling her the baby hadn't survived, that her body might never bear another. She had been broken then, hollowed out by grief. But she had survived. She had rebuilt herself from the ashes of that day. And she wasn't going to die here. Not like this. Not because of him. Victoria forced herself to stop moving. She took slow, measured breaths, despite the panic clawing at her chest. The mud tightened around her legs, but its pulse slowed. She scanned the edges of the bog, searching for anything, a branch, a root, a tuft of grass, and spotted a cluster of reeds just within reach. Inch by inch, she stretched toward them, her muscles screaming, fingertips brushing slick green stems. They slipped once, twice, before she managed to curl her fingers around them. Come on, she gritted, teeth chattering. Come on, the reeds held. Using what little strength she had left, Victoria pulled, shifting her weight forward a fraction of an inch. Then another. The progress was agonizingly slow, but the movement gave her hope. She grabbed a thicker root with her other hand, using it to lever herself upward. The mud slurped angrily as she freed one knee, then the other. Her chest burned. Her arms trembled violently, but she kept going. Rain lashed her face. The forest spun. And just when she thought she could pull no more, when her vision began to tunnel into darkness. Hold on! The voice was deep and close, cutting through the storm like a lifeline. Hold on, I've got you. Victoria lifted her head. Through the curtain of rain, a man was running toward her, boots splashing through the muck. He skidded to a stop at the edge of the bog and dropped to his knees, extending a hand. Take it, he shouted. With the last of her strength, Victoria reached out. Their fingers slipped once, then locked. The man braced his feet and pulled, muscle straining. Slowly, painfully, she began to rise. Mud sucked at her legs, as if refusing to let go, but the grip on her hand was unyielding. With one final heave, she broke free, collapsing onto solid ground, gasping for air. You're all right, the man said, breathless but calm. You're safe now. She blinked up at him through rain-soaked lashes. He was in his early 30s, broad-shouldered, his flannel shirt plastered to his frame. Andrew, he introduced himself gently. Andrew Sinclair. I own the resort. I heard shouting, and I saw everything. Victoria stared at him, too exhausted to speak. The forest blurred around her. Darkness pressed in. Stay with me, Andrew urged, scooping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. We're going to get you help. The next hours were a haze. Andrew carried her through the woods, radioed his staff, and within minutes an SUV was racing down the mountain roads toward a private clinic 20 miles away. Nurses rushed her into a warm room, stripped away her soaked clothes, and wrapped her in heated blankets. For lines were inserted. Machines beeped softly around her. For 5 days, Victoria drifted in and out of a gray, dreamless void. The doctors treated her for hypothermia and severe shock. And then, on the 5th morning, a nurse appeared by her bedside with a cautious smile. "Mrs. Hale," she said softly, "there's something you should know." Victoria's heartbeat quickened as the doctor stepped forward with a chart. "We ran a series of tests while you were unconscious," he said. "And you're pregnant, 12 weeks along." The room tilted. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I can't. I was told I never could." "It's rare," the doctor said gently, "but not impossible. And everything looks healthy so far." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks, hot against her chilled skin. In the wreckage of betrayal and attempted murder, life, impossibly, defiantly, had taken root. Days later, when she finally had the strength to sit up, she laid a trembling hand over her stomach. For the first time since Jonathan had left her to die, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't just survival now. It was purpose. This child, born of devastation and cruelty, was her miracle, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. Victoria remained at the private clinic for several more days, her body slowly regaining warmth and strength. The doctors visited frequently, monitoring her condition and the tiny life growing inside her. But when Andrew Sinclair appeared by her bedside one afternoon, it wasn't with a stethoscope or a chart. It was with something far more powerful. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, pulling up a chair. "I didn't just hear Jonathan leave you there. I recorded it." Victoria blinked, unsure she had heard him correctly. "I carry a small audio recorder when I'm patrolling the property," Andrew continued. "Old habit from when we had some legal issues with guests trespassing. I turned it on when I heard shouting. It captured everything. Every word he said about wanting you gone, about Madison, about your death making him rich." The room seemed to tilt again, but this time not from weakness. Evidence. It wasn't just her word against his. Andrew leaned forward. "You don't have to go to the police. Not yet. But I have an idea, one that lets you take everything from him without lifting a finger." "What idea?" Victoria asked, her voice hoarse. "Let him think you're dead." He let the words hang between them. Andrew explained the plan. He would report finding traces of a woman matching Victoria's description in the bog, but nothing more. Jonathan, under investigation for her disappearance, would believe his plan had succeeded. That belief would shape his next moves and expose him. Victoria hesitated. Part of her wanted to storm into the nearest police station and hand over the recording. But another part, deeper, colder, wanted Jonathan to feel the weight of his choices before the law even touched him. "Make him believe he won," Andrew said softly, "and he'll show the world who he really is." While Victoria recovered, the investigation began. Jonathan was questioned by local authorities 2 days after she vanished. A missing persons report had been filed by the resort, and rangers had found torn fabric near the bog. "I don't know what happened," Jonathan told them, his voice trembling. "She said she was going for a walk. I searched for hours. Please, you have to find her." His performance was convincing, almost. He dabbed at dry eyes, his voice breaking at rehearsed moments. But the lead investigator, a grizzled ranger named Carter, wasn't entirely convinced. "Funny," he remarked. "Most husbands call for help right away. You waited over 3 hours." Jonathan stammered something about panic, but Carter's pen scratched slowly across his notepad. Days turned into a week. There was no body, no clear evidence, but rumors swirled. Students at the university whispered that Dr. Hale was under investigation. Madison grew restless. That was where Noah came in. Andrew's younger brother had returned from Seattle to help with the resort's operations, and he was more than willing to assist. Noah was charming, confident, and most importantly wealthy, at least on paper. Through a mutual acquaintance, he accidentally met Madison at a wine bar in Savannah. He struck up a conversation about art and travel, bought her drinks, and within an hour, she was laughing like they were old friends. Within a week, they were inseparable. Within 2, Madison stopped answering Jonathan's calls. When he finally showed up unannounced at her midtown apartment, he found her packing. "You're leaving," he demanded. Madison didn't even look guilty. "I don't want to be with someone under police investigation," she said coolly. "And Noah actually has a future." "After everything I've done for you," she laughed. "Exactly. You did everything. And now you're nothing." The door slammed in his face. Jonathan stumbled into the street, his chest heaving. In a matter of weeks, the life he had gambled everything for was crumbling. Madison was gone. The police were circling. And the company, Victoria's company, remained locked behind legal walls he couldn't breach without her. In desperation, he returned to Savannah, driving through the night to the townhouse they once shared. It was nearly midnight when he pulled into the driveway, rain still clinging to the edges of the storm. He hurried to the front door, fumbled for his key, and froze. The key no longer fit. He tried again, and again. It was useless. Jonathan stepped back, staring at the door that had once been his. The porch light hummed above him, casting a pale glow on the brass doorknob, and the small detail he hadn't noticed at first, a brand new deadbolt, gleaming where the old one had been. For the first time since leaving Victoria to die, fear settled into his bones. The house, the company, the life, everything he thought would soon belong to him, was slipping beyond his reach, and he had no idea just how much worse things were about to get. 3 weeks later, Savannah was steeped in the golden hush of early summer when Jonathan returned once more to the townhouse on Whitaker Street. He had spent those weeks trapped in a spiral of fear and frustration. Ignored calls, frozen accounts, investigators still circling. The life he had counted on was slipping away piece by piece. He told himself that once the missing person case was closed, once the legal dust settled, he could reclaim what was his. But nothing prepared him for the sight that awaited him. The door swung open not to an empty house, but to a woman standing in the entryway, pale but alive, her posture steady as stone. "Hello, Jonathan," Victoria said softly. For a long moment he couldn't breathe. You're supposed to be dead." She let the silence stretch before answering. "I almost was." Her voice was calm, too calm. "But someone found me, pulled me out before the mud swallowed me whole." Jonathan stumbled backward, his face draining of color. "Victoria, listen, I don't know what you think happened. I know what happened," she cut him off, stepping closer. "I know you followed me into the woods. I know you watched me struggle. And I know you walked away." He raised his hands, feigning outrage. "That's insane. Do you have any idea how this sounds? You're accusing me of trying to kill you with no evidence. No witnesses." Actually, a voice drawled from the hallway. "There is a witness." Jonathan turned sharply. Andrew Sinclair stepped into view, his expression cool and unreadable. "I saw everything," he said. "And I recorded every word you said about Madison, about her death, about the inheritance. All of it." Jonathan's composure cracked. That's illegal," he sputtered. "Not in Georgia," Andrew replied evenly. "And it's already been shared with my attorney and hers. If this goes to trial, you're done." Jonathan stared at them, his breath coming fast. "You can't prove anything." "Oh, but we can," Andrew said, his tone almost conversational. "The audio alone would be enough to destroy you in court. But there's more. Adultery, for instance." He glanced at Victoria. "Your prenup, if I recall, has a morality clause. If you cheat, you lose everything. House, accounts, marital property. It all reverts to her." "That clause won't hold," Jonathan muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "It will," Andrew countered. "Especially when Madison takes a stand and testifies that the pregnancy was fake, and that you were planning to steal from Victoria. Oh, and did I mention she's been seeing my brother Noah for the past 2 weeks?" Jonathan's head snapped up. What? Andrew's smile was thin and cold. She's moved on. Happily, I might add. And she's not exactly loyal. All it took was a few conversations before she started talking about you, about the money, about the lies, about everything. It was as if the ground had been pulled from beneath him. Madison was gone. The company was untouchable. And now, with a single recording and a signature on a legal document, everything he had plotted for was crumbling in front of him. You have two choices, Victoria said quietly. You can fight this and watch your reputation, your career, and your freedom disappear. Or, she opened a folder she had brought with her. You can sign these papers. Divorce. Immediate property separation. You return the apartment, the car, and walk away. I don't press charges. Jonathan stared at the papers as if they might burn him. And if I don't? Andrew stepped forward. Then the police hear everything. And trust me, they will prosecute. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the hallway wall. Then Jonathan exhaled shakily and sank into a chair. His hands trembled as he picked up the pen. The signature he scrawled on the divorce papers was jagged, bitter, but final. Within weeks, the court moved swiftly. The prenup held as Andrew had promised. Jonathan relinquished the Midtown apartment, returned the SUV, and forfeited any claim to Victoria's company or fortune. The townhouse, the business, the investments, all of it remained hers. Jonathan left the courthouse with nothing but a duffel bag and a battered reputation. Victoria walked out with everything that had been hers from the start, and the one thing Jonathan could never take from her again: her future. Summer melted into fall in Savannah, and with the turning of the season came the slow unraveling of Jonathan Hale's life. The townhouse on Whitaker Street, once a symbol of their shared success, now belonged solely to Victoria. His office at the university had been quietly cleared out, his contract terminated under the cloud of scandal. And Madison, the girl for whom he had been willing to destroy everything, had vanished from his life as easily as she had entered it. Jonathan now lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from the marble floors and manicured gardens he had once taken for granted. The walls were thin, the faucet leaked, and the rent was due in cash, a humiliating detail for a man who used to sign six-figure checks without thinking. Most days he walked the streets alone, nursing bitter cups of coffee from corner diners, ignored by the people who once sought his company. He told himself he hated Victoria for what she had done to him, but deep down he knew the truth. No one had done this to him but himself. And every time rain swept through the city and pooled in the gutters, he thought of the bog in the Appalachian forest, the place where he had decided her life was worth less than his ambition, the place where she had survived, and where his life had begun to sink instead. Victoria, meanwhile, had no interest in revenge beyond what had already happened. Watching Jonathan lose everything, his wealth, his career, his carefully constructed facade, was enough. She decided not to press further, not to pursue criminal charges, not because he deserved mercy, but because there was a new life inside her that did. "I don't want my child's story to begin with vengeance," she told Andrew one afternoon as they walked along the Savannah riverfront. "I want it to begin with strength." And so, when the divorce settlement was finalized, she allowed Jonathan to keep a modest, monthly stipend. Enough to survive, but never enough to rebuild the life he had thrown away. It wasn't for him. It was for the child he would likely never meet, but whose existence still tethered them in some small, unchangeable way. There were other loose ends to tie. One of them was the apartment Madison had once occupied, the same apartment Jonathan had bought under a friend's name to hide it from her. Now, with the property back in Victoria's hands, she called Svetlana into her office. "You've been my right hand for 10 years, Victoria said, sliding a set of keys across the desk. "I want you to have this. Consider it a thank you." Svetlana's eyes widened. "Victoria, I can't. That's too much." "It's yours," Victoria insisted. "You've earned it 100 times over." But Svetlana shook her head. Then let me meet you halfway. I'll live there, but as a tenant. No rent, just a repayment over time. Call it a loan without interest." Victoria smiled. It was exactly the kind of response she had expected from the woman who had stood by her through everything. "Then that's what we'll call it," she agreed. As autumn deepened, Victoria began reshaping her life with deliberate care. She appointed Svetlana as interim CEO, placing the day-to-day operations of Hale and Company in her capable hands. She stepped back from the relentless grind that had once defined her, choosing instead to focus on her pregnancy. Her days became quieter, gentler. She traded boardrooms for prenatal appointments, strategy meetings for nursery plans. The townhouse that had once felt like a mausoleum now echoed with the soft hum of possibility. She walked more, ate better, slept deeply. And at night, when the city lights glowed beyond her window, she would rest her hand on the gentle curve of her belly and speak softly to the life growing there. "You and I," she would whisper, "we're going to be just fine." Jonathan, somewhere across town, sat alone in his crumbling apartment, surrounded by the ruins of everything he had once believed he deserved. And in the same way the swamp had once tried to swallow Victoria, the life he had built now dragged him down, inch by inch, with no one coming to pull him free. The reckoning was complete, not with blood or prison bars, but with silence, consequence, and the undeniable truth that justice sometimes comes not as a shout, but as the slow, steady erosion of everything a man once thought he could never lose. Spring returned to Savannah with soft rains and blooming dogwoods, and with it came a new chapter in Victoria Hale's life, one she had never dared dream possible. 9 months after that night in the Appalachian forest, after betrayal and mud and whispered promises to survive, she lay in a sunlit hospital room, cradling the weight of a miracle in her arms. The baby was small, perfect, and fierce in its first cries, a sound that broke something open in her chest. Doctors had once told her motherhood was out of reach, a door forever closed by the wreckage of an old accident. Yet here she was, holding proof that life had found a way through the cracks. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she traced the curve of a tiny cheek, the flutter of impossibly small fingers curling around hers. Andrew Sinclair was there too, standing quietly by the window, his presence steady as the morning light. He had been there through the months of swollen ankles and sleepless nights, through appointments and ultrasounds and waves of fear that sometimes threatened to drown her. He had never asked for anything in return. He had simply stayed, patient, dependable, a quiet force at her side. "She's beautiful," he said softly, stepping closer. "She," Victoria echoed, smiling through her tears. "I still can't believe she's real." "She's as real as it gets," Andrew said, his eyes warm. "And so are you. You did this, Victoria. You fought for this." She looked down at the baby again, her heart swelling with something larger than joy, something like peace. Jonathan did not call. He did not visit. Word around the city was that he had resigned from what little remained of his teaching position and vanished from their shared circles. There were rumors of him taking odd jobs, of nights spent alone in dingy bars, but Victoria no longer listened. Whatever life he lived now, it existed far from hers, in a silence of his own making. And in truth, she preferred it that way. Weeks passed. Spring deepened. The baby, she named her Grace, grew stronger, her cries giving way to coos and soft, searching gazes. Victoria adjusted to the rhythms of motherhood. Late-night feedings beneath the hush of moonlight, lullabies hummed in the stillness of dawn. She delegated more and more of the company to Svetlana and the executive team, who proved more than capable of guiding it forward. Hale and Company thrived, expanding beyond Savannah city limits. But Victoria no longer measured her worth by balance sheets or contracts. Her days were now measured in smiles and milestones, in quiet afternoons spent rocking Grace on the townhouse porch while the world hummed gently beyond the garden gate. Andrew remained part of that world, not hovering, not demanding, but simply present. He brought groceries and warm meals, took walks with them through Forsyth Park, and sometimes on evenings when the air smelled of rain and magnolia blossoms, they sat on the porch steps in companionable silence, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something deeper, the slow, patient rebuilding of trust, the tender beginning of something that might one day grow into love. One evening in late May, as the sun dipped low and turned the Savannah River to molten gold, Victoria stood by the open window of the nursery, holding Grace against her chest. The baby slept, her tiny breaths warm against Victoria's skin. Outside, the cicadas were beginning their nightly chorus, and a breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the room. Victoria looked down at her daughter and smiled, a soft, unguarded smile that felt like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. "I lost almost everything," she whispered, brushing a kiss against Grace's forehead. "And that's how I learned that I was always the strongest thing I had." The words were not bitter. They were a promise. The life she had now was not the one she had imagined when she first built her company, when she first said, "I do" to Jonathan Hale. It was smaller in some ways, quieter, but it was real. It was hers. And in that truth, she found a freedom she had never known before. The story did not end with revenge or ruin. It ended with something far more powerful. Justice earned, life reclaimed, and a beginning forged from the ashes of everything that had tried to break her. As dusk settled over Savannah and the stars began to prick the velvet sky, Victoria closed her eyes and held her daughter close, ready, finally, to step into the future that awaited them both.